We're all good. Okay, good morning everyone to this council briefing of Wednesday the 28th of May 2025. I'll start by asking Councillor Rangiako to do a karakia. Thank you, Councillor.
Morena tātou, whakatakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te ātākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei mauriora. Morena.
Recordings. Welcome to members of the public, either present or online, and those watching at a later date. Welcome staff, presenters, and any attending chairs. Council briefings are recorded. Public galleries attendees' presence implies your consent to being broadcast. Health and safety. In case of an emergency, follow the building wardens to the nearest exit. The meeting point is across the road at Peace Park. Bathroom facilities are located opposite the chamber foyer entrance. There are no apologies. Does anybody have any acknowledgements? Councillor Isles.
Thank you, Your Worship. On Monday night at the Taniatua Community Board, we were privileged to have a presentation by Sandra King, an engineer within Waka Kotahi, and also Andrew Corgill, the new Waikato Bay of Plenty Regional Manager. What they gave was a very detailed update or up-to-date versions of what is happening within the Waka Kotahi with regards to the Pikatahi Bridge. I would like to think, Your Worship, that we could get that presentation brought forward. I mean, councillors can read it within the Taniatua Community Board agenda, but it would be a great presentation because it actually came forward with a lot of actual figures. And one of interest to me was the fact that at the latest readings of traffic and movements, there was 2,210 vehicle per day and then 19.4% of heavy vehicle movements in 2023. I've asked if we could have an updated record of what the actual figures are, plus in perspective what heavy traffics are using the Whakatane Bridge, which is something that you yourself had raised, that you felt they were exceeded the Pikatahi Bridge. So it would be interesting to see exactly what the usage is. Unfortunately, there was no good news as to regards to replacement. I think we're all aware of that. But what there is the intention to replace the actual deck. And again, the case that they presented, they only have 11% of that cost in their existing budget. So that's not going to happen in the too foreseeable future either. So it was a really great presentation and it really deserved a greater presence than what we had at the Taniatua Community Board meeting, but it would be something I would like to think that we may bring forward to Council.
Yeah, no, sure. They covered some of that at the RTC meeting, Regional Transport Committee meeting, but they seem to be short on costings. I don't know if they elaborated on that at the Taniatua meeting.
No, they didn't. But again, as you alluded to, it doesn't give the general public or a lot of us the opportunity to be present at that. But to have that was great.
Thank you, Councillor. Today's briefing is very much has very much an environmental flair. So the theme. The first item is resource management reform update. So, Nick, I'll put it in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's quite a wide-ranging presentation I'll give today, or briefing, and I really want to keep it quite conversational, a bit of a discussion. So as I go, if you've got questions, please just don't wait. just put them out there. It's quite there's quite a lot I'll try and cover in the time we have, but I think it's important to give it that coverage because where we're heading, hasn't arisen in isolation. There's really been an ongoing evolution in the resource management space for a long time, but certainly going back to the previous government. So I will start with a bit of an overview of the three phases of reform, talk a bit about what the previous government did, and it allows us to sort of compare and contrast with what's proposed now. So there is a bit of method there to my madness. Okay, so I will skip ahead. I can if that works. It does work. So the current government, they've talked about 3 phases to the resource management reforms. The first phase was to repeal the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act. So those were developed under the previous Labor government. Started with the Randerson report back in 2019. There's quite a lengthy process to develop these, and then they were enacted in 2023, and they were repealed 3 or 4 months later after the election. So that was one of the first acts of the incoming government. So that's what they called phase 1. Phase 2 is really having a bit of a tutu with some of the existing RMA and some of the other national direction, as well as introducing the Fast Track Consenting Act as a separate act from the RMA. But there are a couple of bills to the Resource Management Act, or the first one's finished, the second one is going through now. I'll describe these in a little bit of time. There's some changes to national policy statements and any national environmental standards. So I try and avoid using acronyms, but forgive me if I slip into them. And then phase 3, which is, we're sort of entering, still in phase 2 a little bit, but entering phase 3, is the replacement of the Resource Management Act by 2 acts, the Planning Act and Natural Environment Act. So just a bit about the there's the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act, the NBEA and SPA. And I guess just sort of stepping away from this a little bit, there's a lot of different tensions that try to be addressed in planning under the Resource Management Act. I mean, it brought together, when it was enacted 1991, it brought together a huge number of different acts into one overarching legislation, and it tries to do a lot and cover a lot of different things. And there are different types of tensions, from sort of the managing the sort of the neighbours at war end of things, height to boundary and fences and retaining walls and how close things are to boundaries. There's that sort of aspect, but there's also trying to address what we call these wicked problems, these sort of complex problems with social and physical and environmental and cultural dimensions, and trying to address those which are broader and actually go beyond just planning, but there is certainly a planning dimension. So, climate change, housing affordability, right? Some quite complex issues. Not all of it's planning, but there's certainly a planning dimension. So the NBEA and SPA, they were really driven in sort of an outcomes-based approach, and that was a sort of an underlying ethos. What are the outcomes that we're wanting to achieve, both nationally, regionally, as a community? So we had these, list of about 16 to 20-ish outcomes in the Act, in the NBEA, and that covered things like greenhouse gas reductions, public access, recreation, housing provision and type affordability. There's a whole big long list of things, and these were, and it also had provision for statements of community outcome that could be delivered or developed at a district level. What are the outcomes that we want to achieve? And then assessing activities against these outcomes and how they met them, or did they stand up to them. So that was sort of, I guess, that end of the spectrum. Under the NBEA and SPA, there was to be one plan for the region, a combined district and regional plan covering the whole region, and also a spatial plan for the whole region. And they were developed jointly between local authorities, iwi, well, it's actually Māori, the way that there would be a joint planning committee, and the way it was developed was to was essentially left to the region, and in the case of Māori representation, that was to be determined by iwi and hapu, essentially. So there was a bit of leeway in how that was developed, and also central government participation, and that was both the spatial plan and the natural and built environment plans, and that was to cover all your district planning, all your regional planning into this one plan. And then there's also this enhanced a national planning framework, which is essentially a strategic direction, environmental limits and targets, and also how to resolve conflicts between these different outcomes. Because when you get a long list of outcomes, everything from motherhood to apple pie, it can be hard to actually find your way through those where you're trying to do everything for everyone. Inevitably, there are trade-offs. You simply can't do, provide enough houses, but also not have any more greenhouse gas emissions, not have any more degradation of waterways, but enhancing rural environments. I mean, it's trade-offs. And then, a regional planning committee, which was going to do the work with participation from all the different entities to develop these plans. So that was the approach, broadly speaking. And I sort of emphasise that because there are similarities with what's proposed
Deputy
now.
Mayor has a question.
I was just waiting for him to finish. Morning, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you for this. This might sound a little bit basic, but point 2 up there, give effect to the principles or to tiriti or waitaki.
Yeah.
We see this line a lot, and I actually don't think I know what that means. Like, what does that mean from a local government's obligation point of view versus how we want to include Māori in all of our decision-making?
Yeah. Yeah, I put that in there deliberately because that's what was in those acts. And in the purpose of the RMA, there's which is sort of part 2, and there's sections 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
There are these different things that it's essentially the overall purpose of what the RMA is trying to achieve. And it has things like, and the words are really important. So for some parts, it's have regard to these matters, right? The test for have regard to is quite different from give effect to, or enable, or so I'm just trying to, I guess, and at the moment, it's the direction we're heading in under the previous government was that it was a stronger emphasis on giving effect to the principles. The principles have actually been fleshed out through case law. I can't recall all of them at the moment, off the top of my head, but it's actually something that's evolved through case law. And so the key words there are probably give effect to, in terms of it's a very strong direction that you must be doing in developing these. That's quite different from have regard to, give consideration to, rather than give effect to is quite an active, it's
So
quite
when will we
an
know
active approach.
if we're not obeying or being responsible for that?
It would be a combination of both the process that you used to develop those plans and how you did that, and how you, were engaging or enabling participation of iwi hapu, but also probably the outcomes of the, what's actually in the plan. I mean, ultimately these sorts of things get tested in the courts, but I guess ironically, if you're given effect to them, then you may not need to end up there. But give effect to is strong directive language that we would need to do in the development of these plans. But that was in that plan, in that legislation. It's not in the current legislation. Well, we don't know what it's going to say, but it's not going to be give effect to the principles of the treaty.
Just supplementary, if I may. I just had a quick look, and the courts have developed a whole lot of principles around participation, protection, redress, cooperation, things like that. But that was all for the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. If they're specifically saying Te Tiriti o Waitangi, surely that makes a significant difference because it implies it's the Māori language version, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Which is much more, talks much more about tino rangatiratanga and self-determination and sovereignty.
Yeah, yeah. And in the regional planning committee, that included participation of Māori as in the same way that councils would participate. So that's, sitting around the decision-making table essentially.
I mean, another major difference, getting away from that second point, is those acts gave emphasis to environmental restoration as opposed to just managing effects, which the old RMA really was about managing effects, and this one was going to be about actually undoing some of the bad stuff we did. And I guess in the new one, we're going back the other way again, I'm guessing. But
Yeah, I mean, and I want to emphasise, we haven't seen the wording of the new bills.
No.
They haven't come out yet.
I'm guessing.
What we've seen is the expert advisory group report and ministerial direction, essentially, on what things they would adopt from the report and what they might want to modify and what they wouldn't adopt. So I'll keep going because, but I really just wanted to set the context, and it's quite important just to think about what was proposed in the previous government, what the current government proposes, because a lot of the processes are very similar, superficially, but I guess the underlying principles are quite different, and I think it's probably important to consider that. So phase 2. So the second bill is currently in select committee, and that addresses, there's a bit of infrastructure stuff, bit of housing, making MDRS, the medium density residential requirements, optional. There's a few bits and pieces, but it's really sort of tinkering with what we've got at the moment. There is some work going on in developing the new Granny Flats National Environmental Standard. Apparently something for Papakainga as well. I haven't seen the detail of that, but that's been flagged as some work that is ongoing to develop a new. And I'll just also highlight the difference between national environmental standards and national policy statements. National policy statements, they really, they're quite high level and set the overall objectives, policies, overall direction. They're quite strategically focused documents, quite high level, that then need to be interpreted into the lower order plans, the regional plans, regional policy statements, district plans. National environmental standards are very directive. They'll often have rules that you'll have to insert into a district plan or a regional plan. So they're very specific, very directive. So a bit of a difference there. So the higher level ones, the higher order, are actually the national policy statements. So just it's important to note. So in terms of this, there's other work going on national environmental standards, work going on national policy statements, including a new national policy statement for infrastructure. Haven't seen that yet, and a new national policy statement for natural hazards. Haven't seen that. The indications are they talk about language like less directive in terms of natural hazards, sort of a softer approach, and we may see more coming out through the phase 3 reforms, but we haven't seen any detail yet. There has been indications for the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land that, well, it's more than indication, it's pretty clear they're going to do it. They will remove the Class 3 soils from the NPS HPL. That affects some of our soils, although a lot of ours on the Rangataki Plains in particular are 1 and 2, Class 1 and 2.
So with the last 2 slides and this slide, basically the current government is agreeing that things need to change, and with this one on page 4, they're just slightly tweaking it more to their flavour than the previous government's flavour.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
But
The big
it's
changes are
with-
coming through the phase 3 reforms, yeah.
Within the same framework as has been planned for the last 3 or 4 years.
So these changes, it's also under the Resource Management Act. So when they repealed the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act, that meant that the RMA was still
Yeah.
the only act
Yep.
in town. But it's going to be replaced
Yep.
in the phase 3
So
reforms.
same thing, we're just flavouring it
Yes.
more towards
Yeah.
current.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but there's some subtle changes there, and changes that matter a lot. Like, I mean, there's the NPS National Policy Statement, HPL. Now, making tweaks to that, but in reality, on the Rangitaki Plains, it's not enough.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they're changing, what is it, the level 3, when most of our level out here on the Rangitaki Plains that will allow us to build on our own land, is determined by those stages 1 and 2. I'd like to see them get rid of the HPL altogether,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's restricting us out on the plains to build on our own land. So it's just
Is that because the productive land?
productive land.
It's mostly 1s and 2s, yeah, yeah.
On that same theme, which is a serious bugbear for us, since we are in a district where we've neither got residential land or industrial land, it's mostly comes under HPL, I think. This issue of giving priority to private property rights. So if you've got a piece of private property, well, the idea is that it's I think where they're driving is that it's your property, so you can do what you like. But there's sort of a bit of tension between that and the HPL, right? If I've got a piece of land it's classified as HPL, on one hand I should be able to do what I like, but on the other hand I can't. So do you have any idea?
We need to see the detail of the bills, but I will get to the acts in a bit more detail, or what's proposed. So I'll keep going, and we'll just see if it answers any other questions. So in terms of phase 3, so an expert advisory group was commissioned to do some work on what the RMA should be replaced with, and they produced their expert advisory report, which was released earlier this year. And so in that, what they proposed in that report is to replace the RMA with 2 acts, the Planning Act, and that's going to cover all your district plans, land use planning, subdivision, infrastructure, and that one had as a guiding principle, and it came out of the coalition agreement with the, I think it was the ACT National Party, was the enjoyment of property rights as a guiding principle. So it covers urban development, infrastructure, natural hazards, land use planning regulation. And the second one is the Natural Environment Act. So that's going to cover fresh water, Indigenous biodiversity, interestingly, which we currently address in our district plan. That would go under the Natural Environment Act and actually be addressed by regional councils. Also under the Natural Environment Act, coastal, air, most of the stuff that the regional council does, and a few other bits and pieces like Indigenous biodiversity. And so there would be, under both acts, enhanced policy direction. Under the Planning Act, we would see nationally standardised zones. So we've rehoused our district plan into the national planning standards at the moment, and that's changed a lot of the titles of our zones. This feels like a bit of an evolution. Under that national planning standards, there's about 20 odd zones, standard zones that you essentially choose from. It doesn't then prescribe what the rules of those zones are. This would, so there would be essentially a cookie cutter approach. If you have a general residential zone, all the rules, those are the rules that you adopt, all the development standards will all be the same. So therefore, a general residential zone in Whakatane would be the same as a general residential zone in Tauranga, same as one in Vikago. They would all be the same everywhere. And to there would be a pathway to make changes to those zones, but you'd have to justify, or council would have to justify any changes through those. There'd be a process if you made any bespoke zones or any changes to zones. So what it's driving at is greater standardisation in district plans, and there would be a combined district plan for the region. We would have there'd be a whakatane chapter. There'd be chapters for every authority, and there would also be a spatial plan chapter. So once again, it's introducing a regional spatial plan, making them a regulatory document rather than the current situation where it's essentially non-regulatory. It's not a requirement. This would make it a requirement. Would have a combined district plan, but there'd also be under the Natural Environment Act, a natural environment plan. So that would be a...
Just a question, if we can take a step back, Nicholas. If they're making amendments to the NPS and those are interpreted through the RPS, where do the RPS stand in the future?
The RPS will go. There'll be no RPS.
Because if the RPS goes, the likes of Rangitaki River Forum, co-governance forum, I know that's a dirty word in some spaces, but Rangitaki River Forum, te Maru o Kaituna, Tarawerawa Restoration Group, they're interpreted through the RPS, and those settlements, these documents, are recognised and provided for within the RPS. If there's no RPS, where does that put those for?
My understanding is that Ministry for the Environment are doing a lot of work as to look at how they would rehouse those settlements under the new planning framework. But I'm not sure until I've seen the detail. I haven't seen any detail on that. I would expect if it's a result of a treaty settlement and there's an act, then that would need to go into the new planning framework. But how that happens, I'm not sure, and a question for the Ministry for the
Yeah, I
Environment.
mean, they're legislative because they're being
Yeah.
created through those people's acts, that I just wonder where they go in the future. And this is the same as the principles of the Tiriti that aren't going to be in these future RMA amendments. It's a bit murky. The worry for us is, I guess, heavy.
Yeah,
Well, heavy in general.
yeah, it'll be something to keep an eye on. I understand the Ministry for the Environment are doing lots of work at it, but until we've seen the detail come out, we just don't know. So yeah, regional spatial plan would still be a thing. Essentially, I would expect that a lot of the national direction will come from the national policy statements and the national environmental standards. They'll be rehoused essentially. There might be some changes to suit the philosophy behind these acts. As I said, we would have a whakatane chapter, and that would need to give effect to the spatial plan, be consistent with it, but we would essentially be picking and choosing from a list of standardised zones. I'll keep going because I've got a bit more detail on some of the next pages. So, rather than outcomes, there are national goals that would try to be achieved through this. There would be this national policy direction, so I guess you could say less regionalisation, more nationally driven policy, more standardisation. We'd have these standardised zones. Under the Natural Environment Act, there would be environmental limits. I mean, that was talked about under the previous legislation. Much narrower scope of matters that can be considered. So, for example, heritage. We do have heritage chapters in our district plan, can be addressed under the RMA. It wouldn't be addressed under the Planning Act. If it's covered under other legislation, that other legislation might be beefed up to pick up some of that, but it wouldn't be covered under the Planning Act. So a much narrower scope of issues that can be addressed under the Planning Act. So quite different from sort of a broad, big range of community outcomes focus, much narrower focus. and we'd have a very standardised form and structure, both of spatial plans and the regulatory plans. They would essentially be prescribed, and there's been talk of, having a nationwide e-plan essentially, where you could go in and look at any place and look at all the planning information.
So just in terms of the narrower scope, so does that mean that if the council is making a decision on a resource consent, for example, and there's a heritage issue, you'd still consider it, but it would be under a Heritage Act or something like that?
Probably wouldn't be able to consider, the
Wouldn't be able
council
to consider.
wouldn't be able to consider it because it would be addressed through the Heritage Act and through that authority, Heritage New Zealand. So those matters would be beyond the scope of things that could be considered. So there are some process changes, and a lot of these are actually quite similar to well, not all of them, but some of them are quite similar to what was under the previous legislation. So in terms of the spatial plan and the combined plans, public notification, the submissions will be heard by an independent hearing panel who would make recommendations. So it's a bit like our hearings panel we've got, make recommendations to local authorities. And if the local authority was to adopt the recommendations, then the only matters that could be appealed to the Environment Court would be around the legality of what's proposed, very limited appeal rights. At the moment, when we're going through a plan change process, it's quite wide-ranging what can be appealed to the Environment Court. You could appeal it because you don't like what's proposed. Under this, you're really limited to, is it actually legal what's proposed, or is it sort of some what they call points of law? Has the law been correctly applied? However, if the authority wanted to make changes to what was recommended, then that suddenly opens up the scope of appeals to the Environment Court, so it could be much broader. So essentially, what it's doing is trying to truncate the appeals process, make it much quicker to make it operative. Your question?
Yeah, I mean, some of this is quite appealing in that, the intention is to try and streamline things so that we can get things through quicker because, things happen very slowly under the current system. But in terms of hearings, we have very few hearings even under the present system, right? Maybe, how many would it have been in the last year? 2 or something?
Yeah, most of the hearings are for consent applications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this is really going to make much of an impact, given that doesn't seem to be an issue anyway. But
What it would do is reduce the number of appeals.
which are already very low
Yeah,
anyway.
which is also, but I think nationally, you do have this a lot.
Right.
So,
Yep.
but that's similar to what was, I think it's essentially the same as what was proposed under the previous,
Okay.
under the NBEA, and it seems to be the way that the direction of travel, shall we say. There would also be, in addition to the Environment Court, there'd be a new planning tribunal, and the intention of that is to have essentially a quick and cheaper way of resolving any conflicts through a planning tribunal. See what the detail of that looks like, but the intent is that would be an alternate to going through an extended Environment Court process. Should be a shorter and sharper, but anyway, we haven't seen details, so we'll see what they say there. But also having a national compliance and enforcement regulator, so with a regional presence. That's on a slightly slower track than the development of the Planning Act and the Natural Environment Act, but that seems to be something that could be coming, which would have implications obviously for what we do in terms of our compliance enforcement. But once again, haven't seen details of whether they do everything or whether they are more setting guidelines and best practice type work.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. On that new regulator one and compliance, is that actually a national compliance and then you have a regional presence? Like, I'm just thinking in terms of like our transport needs? Are we going to be down the end of the food chain if we're wanting to accelerate something?
It's more going to be around how our combined district plan is being complied with and any non-compliances, and then what we do about non-compliances and how we enforce that. So it's more our role as a regulator rather than our role as a provider of infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah. In terms of the details in the Treaty of Waitangi and how this would be reflected, we don't have much detail on that at the moment. The EAG recommended a similar approach to what's in the RMA at the moment, but we don't have any clarity. So that will be something we'll need to pay attention to.
What's the EAG, sorry?
Oh, that's the expert advisory group. That was a group that was brought together to develop the report into what should replace the RMA. Yeah. So implications of the new acts, they will narrow the scope of the resource management system and the effects it controls. So I've got, a CBD up there. At the moment we have limits around building heights, which is sort of comes out of the view shafts to the escarpment. That sort of thing might disappear. We don't know until we see detail, but we may not be able to have those sort of amenity landscape controls that could go. So we're shifting from to a much more permissive planning environment, I would say, and an emphasis on property rights, which really means private property rights. So it is a big shift from the outcomes-based approach. It's more around the presumption is you can do what you want on your property unless a rule says you can't. And that rule would be prescribed under a standardised zone, and any changes to a standardised zone would have to go through a justification process. Planning Act. Yeah, I've just put up that quote. That's come out of that expert advisory group report. I think that's important just to really note that as a guiding principle. But there are still goals around infrastructure provision, having well-functioning urban and rural areas, and there will also be a zone with flexibility on use on Māori land. Now, I don't know whether that's Māori freehold land specifically, or there'll be some other definition, but there has been signalled that there would be a enabling zone. Also don't know how that would then interplay with things like the NPS HPL, what that means in terms of how land is used, but from what's said so far, it generally just says an enabling zone, Māori land.
Would that probably coincide with the review that they're looking at making changes to the Tūturu Whenua Act? Currently at the moment?
Possibly, I don't know. I mean, that's around how you get decisions for using land in emergencies and stuff as well, isn't it? And getting...
Well, I mean, there's that, but they're also looking at, returning to 99-year leases, putting agents on land and trusts if they deem that trust is not utilising the land, which sort of ties into opening up more flexibility of Māori land, but in a more sort of forceful way.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. But it'll be something to keep an eye on. That would need to be across, given the amount of Māori land we have in the district. It's probably quite important as to how it's used, and also thinking about, is it a zone that we'd want to use? So, also a bit about takings. So you have this two concepts really, betterment and takings, and it's really about the impact of land use controls on land, on private land. So we've talked previously about how if we rezone land, that can affect the value of that land, and that's essentially privatised. It's called betterment. So if we take some rural land and make it medium density residential, suddenly the value of that land shoots up, and that wealth all goes to the landowner. That's betterment. Betterment was expressly not, it was looked at, but then decided it was not something that was going to be pursued under the Planning Act. However, there is some other work underway in different parts of government around value capture from infrastructure and stuff. Haven't seen any detail on that, but that might be something that's going to be coming. So we'll put that to one side for now. Takings are where if we're putting controls on which limit the ability of someone to do something on their land, then that would be a cost. And so there will be a process by which the landowner could then look to get compensation from a local authority for having an overlay or an imposition on their land that is more onerous than what the national standards prescribe. Yes. So we need to see the detail on that, but it's been signalled quite strongly that takings would be included, and that comes back to that, the emphasis on property rights, right? So if you're adding an imposition to someone's property rights, therefore the community may have to pay. So, yeah.
Nick, will this apply to regional council as well? And some of the limitations they have on us building on our land, like 200 metres from the toe of a stopping and having to get geotech work done? I mean, these takings, can we make claims through that?
Well, potentially we'd need to see the detail of the legislation or the bills to see what was in and what was out. I imagine there would be some fairly prescriptive wording around it, but until we've seen that, we simply don't know. In this context, it's more around the zonings that are used, and so, for example, if we had a zone that allowed a certain height under the standardised rules, or if you wanted to impose an overlay to protect some sort of amenity feature, for example, height limits in our CBD, that may be considered grounds to go down the taking route because we're preserving that for some community good. If it's around infrastructure provision, which I think was what the Regional Council would argue, that may be considered differently. But we need to see the detail.
Thank you.
Natural Environment Act. I've got a picture up of a river just because I like fly fishing, basically. So that's prepared, the Natural Environmental Plan prepared by regional councils, and that will have environmental limits to protect the life-supporting capacity of the natural environment. I haven't seen a lot in the information available around restoration or enhancement, which was in the previous acts. There may be something around that, but we'd need to see. But it would control, water allocation, for example. They are also looking at a specific charge in over-allocated catchments, like where the water's over-allocated, for improvement plan action. So there's a bit there. If it's tied specifically to a problem with too much water being taken, then that would be an area around, enhancement. But once again, we haven't seen the detail on that, and it's something that the regional council would be controlling. Importantly, once again, SCNAs, significant natural areas. We have significant areas of Indigenous biodiversity in our plan, which are effectively SNAs. The responsibility for those would go to the regional council, not us. That would be a change. Regional spatial plan, it would have strong regulatory weight. It would go through a process to become a regulatory document, and then long-term plans, regional land transport plans, would be required to align with the regional spatial plan. So it would have constraints, opportunities, would be developed by the councils, but working with others. But also, interestingly, so natural hazards would be addressed under the Planning Act, and the responsibility for the management of natural hazards would fall between regional and territorial authorities, and that would be determined by the regional council and the district councils as to who's responsible for which hazard. There would also be a separate, and I should say on the hazards, I mean, we do have that kind of at the moment already under the regional policy statement. That does allocate responsibility for natural hazards to different councils, to either the regional council or to the territorial authorities. There would also be a separate, Julie, you have a question?
Oh, no, sorry, I was just ready to, when you finished. But my question was, is there any indication about that responsibility between the natural hazards management as to what might change between the two councils yet? Is there any sort of,
No, nothing like that at all, but I would be having a look at the regional policy statement as probably a guiding approach, because it's already done there, and there would be logic behind
keeping it?
why different councils do different hazards, and then I would expect it to be similar, but until we get to that point in those discussions, we simply don't
Haven't got any.
know. But there would also be a separate, oh, sorry, Nandor?
So I just, while you're on a pause, just quickly going back to the previous page on the Natural Environment Act, it says charging for natural resource use to recover admin and monitoring.
Yes.
So that's essentially a resource rental. Is that going to be restricted just to recovering admin and monitoring, or?
Well, other than the specific charge and over other catchments for improvement plan actions.
So is that opening the door to charging for water use?
Well, it is, but it's for specific things.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
No, that's, I think it's Waiweka, actually.
You know, like you just mentioned before, and sorry if I wasn't here earlier, around how all the different particularly all the different plans and the regional spatial plan and the trend. So when it comes to, say, the Pikitahi Bridge and people sort of wanting support for that, would that have to be in the spatial plan for it to then be tied to the regional transport plan?
Having it in the regional spatial plan would make it a much stronger case for putting it into the RTP, yes. So that would be a really good place to have it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And just on the regional spatial plan, so there would be a separate, essentially an implementation plan or implementation document that each council would develop to how they're going to implement the spatial plan as well. So combined district plan, which would, it covers the land use subdivision activities. We would, as I said before, we would go through and select each zone. It probably means that if we aren't making changes to zones, then the submissions we get would be on which zone we've applied where, rather than on the content of the zones, because if it's a standardised zone nationally, it won't be able to be submitted on because that's the standard zone. It'd be more, is that zone appropriate for that location, would be where submissions would fall, essentially. Unless we were making changes, in which case that opens up submissions. So many more permitted activities and a few reductions in the activity classes, but probably not having a big effect, to be honest. Natural environment plan, there's Waimana. Allocation of water, other resources, air, water, soil, indigenous biodiversity, landscapes, that would all be covered under the natural environment plan, which would be developed by the regional council. So that would mean some of the things that we currently address in our district plan wouldn't be covered in district plan. They would go into the regional plan, including significant natural areas.
Just going back again to the combined district plan. So if a council was to create changes to one of the standard zones, has to justify, so that can presumably be overruled. Is that a court thing, or does that go back to the minister, or how does that get resolved?
I'm trying to recall what the report says, what the AG report says. Essentially, it is something that could be tested, I believe. I don't think it needs to go to the minister, but it might need to. I need to go back and check. But there's more detail to come, so when we do see the bill, we can come back and talk to that. Yeah. It doesn't look like something, from what I've read, it doesn't look like something that you would do unless you had a compelling reason to want to enter into that place. which we may do, but the test will get a lot more difficult and potentially more expensive, because then we get, are there takings associated with that? And, yeah. So implications for us. The policies and the plans will change before the consenting compliance, which is why that national regulator with a regional presence is on a slower track than the development of the new legislation and the consequential act. Within the Eastern Bay, or within the Bay of Plenty, we essentially have the bones of a spatial plan. We've got the spatial plan here, our places, smart growth in the west. Rotorua have their, it's actually a future development strategy, which is a bit like a spatial plan essentially. Those could be combined with a bit more work to make sure that the scope of the spatial plan and the structure is all correct. But it may be able to be brought together quite quickly. We haven't seen the time frame for transition into the new era. Under the previous legislation, the government had talked about a sort of a 10-year transition. I suspect it's going to be much shorter, is what's going to want to be achieved under this. But we really need to see, and we'll have more detail once we see bills and stuff come out. However, there are some immediate implications for us. So our district plan review is coming up from July. We really start to get some budget in the LTP because it's every 10 years, and our district plan was notified 2013, made operative 2017, so the district plan review is really due. So we are just getting that underway. So we expect the process will change under which you would do a district plan. It might be a district plan chapter with standardised zones, but we still have a number of issues that need to be addressed, including giving effect to the spatial plan, enabling growth. Looking at structure plans, but also there's a number of natural hazard modelling that we need to address. There's a long list, and in fact, I think we're due to have another briefing in a month or so to start looking at some of those issues. So we'd expect the process to change in terms of how it's done, but the issues still need to be addressed. There's a large number of them.
So that second line down there, forming the basis of the wider Bay of Plenty spatial plan, is this the beginning of combining all the councils into one council? Is that, do you see a similar trend through the rest of this thing?
Look, I don't know. It's not. That's a local government matter. In terms of the RM process, I can't comment on that. But I guess it's very similar in terms of the combined spatial plan, combined plan for the region, to what the previous legislation was doing. It's still, but whether that means local government form, I don't know. There's no discussion of that in this sphere.
Well, the minister was asked that question at, I think, the conference or something, and his response was no, but I think it's because they simply don't have time. Because what this looks like is it's being set up, but they don't have time to lock everything. So getting onto the timescales, we're in June, almost pretty well. They've said that they want these two pieces of legislation through by the end of the year.
So the bills will be out this year. They want them enacted before the next central government elections, national elections. So that would be, I think they're looking at middle of next year.
Right, but the bills by the end of this year.
Yeah.
And there's local government elections in the middle, and presumably we will get to submit on these things. These changes are really quite profound. There's quite a bunch of council functions that now might be consolidated into separate entities.
Yep.
So, the whole question of what local government actually is, what it will do in the future, is raised by this, and yet very, very compressed time frame. which, could be deliberate, it could be accidental or whatever.
Yeah. The government had said the primary engagement on this will be through the select committee process. So read into that what you will. And I guess the other thing to consider is the legislative certainty, and that's quite. So parts of the process of these acts are very similar to the previous acts, but there are there's a fundamental difference in the philosophy underpinning these. So, will a future government change that? We don't know. So, it just means, I guess, and we haven't seen a lot from the other parties as to what they propose, and I guess it's going to come once the bills are released. Oh, excuse me. But, what does the future look like in this space? It's hard to know, right? Because there have been such a radical change from the previous act. Next time the flavour of the government changes, are they going to make changes to this? We don't know. But nonetheless, we still need to do our planning functions within that uncertainty. And we still have issues that we need to address. We still need to enable growth. We still need to address natural hazards. We still need to look at things like rural subdivision, how the NBS HPL affects our ability to work on Māori land. There are also issues that need to be addressed because, our district plan is, 2017, but actually goes back to 2013. So it's getting quite old.
Yeah.
And a lot of the issues that we have now may not have been addressed or may not have been foreseen that well then because there's been so much change in the national direction and national policy statements. So we do need to consider those and what the future looks like for us.
On HPL, under the current system, is there any scope for fighting? As in, I've got a piece of land, it's my land, it's classified as HPL, but I want to do something with it. Can I appeal and say, no, I want to proceed with this? Is there any mechanism for that? For applying for an exemption or something?
Yeah,
in the current system?
We had a consent hearing last week essentially on that matter.
Okay.
So you can still go through, it just costs money, right?
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Nick. Any further questions for Nick? It's a pretty major thing, but I think what I hear you saying repeatedly during this is the detail, and the devil is probably in the detail, and the detail's coming through at just the wrong sort of time, I suppose.
Yeah, and the other part, is really around, getting into that district plan review in this context.
Yeah.
We still need to do stuff. It doesn't mean we should sit back because the issues we have are really important and need to be addressed.
Yeah, David, would you like to say something?
I was just going to say, just a reminder, tomorrow at the Infrastructure and Planning Committee, you do have MP Simon Court coming. And he's the ACT member. One of his portfolios is the RMA amendment. So you may wish to ask some of the questions you're asking of Nick, save them up for him tomorrow. So.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, David.
Well, if there's everyone's stunned, so if there's no further questions, we'll break for morning tea and come back at 10:15.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
put in there, fabulous. But I thought it was pretty well.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. The next show is Nigel Clark, who's come to talk rubbish to us. So
And he's so great at it too.
it's important. It's an important topic. So thanks, Nigel.
Yeah, it is.
Yep. Good morning, councillors. What I want to talk about this morning is a problem not just that affects Whakatane Council, but every council, and that is curbside contamination. So what we're talking about with curbside contamination is items that are in our recycling and our green waste that shouldn't be there. When we think about our recycling and the green waste that we collect at the curbside, we should think of it as a product. It's a product that goes into an industry and that is turned into something else. We don't just put recycling in the bin and the fairies come along and turn it into something else. It actually goes through processes and industrial processes. If that product is not good enough, then those that turn the recycling and green waste into compost don't want it. It's as simple as that. The similarity I often use when I'm trying to explain this to people is, imagine if you go to a supermarket and you buy a sealed bag of potatoes and you get that bag of potatoes home and you open it up and it's 50% soil. You're not going to buy that brand of potatoes again. And it's the same with our green waste and our recycling. If it's full of things that shouldn't be in there, the industry doesn't want it. Basically, we're just talking about the curbside bins, and obviously that contamination is coming from the households. It's important to note that most households do the right thing. It's actually a minority that are making the whole service ineffective. There is evidence that some households just don't want to recycle correctly, and some households actually hide contamination under their recycling and their green waste. And this is the main problem that we need to address. And I'll talk a bit more later about our plan and how we'll do that. We do education. Education does make a change. And we will continue to educate. We will continue to reinforce messages. But the problem is reaching that minority that actually don't want to be educated. So here's a couple of examples of our curbside recycling from the yellow lid bin. The bin on the left is an actual bin at the curbside. There is nothing in there that can go through our recycling facility. The load on the right is a load from one of our curbside trucks that has been emptied out at the material recovering facility. Again, it's just more or less all waste. Some of the recycling has been removed from that, but that is what was left over. It's interesting, that photo, because it's actually a lot of building materials in there, and it looks like someone's possibly just used yellow lid bins to get rid of building materials from home DIY project or something like that.
Sorry, if we couldn't identify it like fly tipping as the name, like there's a plastic bag there, it might have had details of something in it.
I'll cover later what we're doing to actually identify those that are doing this. That's not a method that's included, but we'll talk about that a bit later.
So the bin on the left, you said the bin on the left, nothing there can be recycled. Those look like metal tubes. Are they not?
Not through our recycling plant. That's not materials we can accept through the yellow lid bins.
Right.
But it is materials that could be recycled elsewhere.
Right, I see.
They could be dropped off at the Resource Recovery Centre and go into scrap metal. They could be dropped off at Macaulay's Metals and be recycled that way. But our bins are limited to paper, cardboard, tins, cans, plastics 1, 2 and 5, because that's what the sorting facility accepts.
Right, so it's not metal, it's specifically tins and cans.
It's specifically tins and cans,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah, thank you.
So just sticking with the curbside contamination for a bit. When the trucks collect the recycling, they go to what's called a material recovery facility in Tauranga, which we commonly call the MRF. The MRF conducts audits of our recycling. They basically do 1 or 2 random audits a month, and we get the audit results, which is shown on the sheet on the right. It's interesting that the title on that sheet, as I explained earlier, says incoming product. So it's seen as a product. And that actual audit was, by weight, 43% waste. The highest we've had was 67% waste recorded in October last year. On average this year, we're basically around 23.5% on all our loads. We have identified there are certain areas where rates of contamination are higher, but saying that, it is a district-wide problem. It's not just those areas. However, the MRF have advised that they will no longer accept the recycling directly from Murrapara, because it is the worst area at the moment. So we are having to take that back to Whakatane, empty it out, pre-sort it, and we're having to landfill a lot of that recycling, obviously, and then we'll forward on what we can pull out to the MRF in Tauranga. The 3 photographs at the bottom are all from one load of Murrapara recycling on one day. We're not saying every load is like that, but that's how much of a problem it can be.
Julie?
Yep.
Do they charge us extra for the, like if there's a certain, say it's over 20% contamination, are they charging us extra for that extra work they have to do?
No, not what they do, some councils,
Yeah. Okay.
but when we did the contract, because of the effect of China stopping imports at the time when we did the contract, we actually said the recyclables belong to the contractor after they've collected them. So they're actually incurring those costs at the moment, but they're having to landfill material that is sent to the facility.
Councillor
Excuse me.
Isles?
Nigel, just one more question. Have those trucks got cameras on them to actually see the contents going?
Yes, I'll come to that in a moment.
Okay.
Yep. But it's not just the recycling. Green waste is a problem as well. Our current contractor is refusing to process some of our green waste, basically because there's just too much rubbish in it. Again, they cannot sell the resulting product. They've actually lost 2 major customers who no longer want the compost produced from our green waste because the end product has just got too much bits of plastic and other rubbish in it. We have been stockpiling the contaminated green waste for a while at the Keeper Road composting facility, and just last month we had to clear that out, and there was 745 tonnes, which cost us 143,000 to landfill. Because we're paying emission trading schemes, we're paying waste levy on that amount. What's really upsetting is that when you look at what's going to landfill, you can see that most of it is compost. But we just cannot get rid of it. We cannot sell it onto the market because of the amount of contamination in there. The interesting thing is that the green waste that is dropped off at the Resource Recovery Centre is not a problem. that product is fine, and we can process that and we can sell it. It's not a problem. It's the green waste that comes out the curbside bins. There's a very clear distinction between the two waste streams. So the green waste, basically, the current process is just not sustainable. We cannot continue to stockpile and landfill that amount of product. I will talk about our plan of action in a while, but there are other options we could consider. We could withdraw the green waste curbside service and just go to resource recovery centre drop-offs. The only one of the effects of that could be that our contractors could ask for compensation because they're losing an income, but we haven't had that conversation yet.
Locked in for a few years.
Yeah. Well, actually, the green waste is only locked in till 2026, but the curbside recycling is locked in till 2031. We could put full-time bin auditors out there, which the cost would be less than landfilling the product. However, we have done that in the past, and those bin auditors did receive a lot of abuse from residents, unfortunately.
Going to Andrew's question, because it would be good if at the time that the bin is picked up, the driver can see what's in it, but the lids are, not transparent. But if they had transparent lids and there was a camera, the driver would just say, I'll just leave that one, that's obviously contaminated, and go on to the next one, or something like that.
Yep, I'll come to that in a moment. Yep.
Right.
So we do have a plan of action, which I'll cover on that. Before I talk about our plan of action, I think it's important to look at what information we do have out there and what our current process is. So we do have information out there. We have information on our website, we put things on social media, we have bin stickers, we have flyers, we have a school education program. So if people want to know what goes in what bin, that information is out there. In Murrapara, the double-page flyer, which is the two at the bottom of that image, we letter dropped those to all houses in Murrapara in January. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have much of a change. So there is information out there.
Do you guys still have those magnets? Because those were really, really good.
We don't have magnets at the moment, no.
Because they were really, really good, because they were just a daily thing. You go to the fridge, 20 times a day, and you'd have that in your face, along with all the kids' certificates and stuff stuck to it.
Yep, we could look at.
It was really, really effective.
We can look into that, into making some more of those. So, what is our current process? So when the drivers pull up at the curb, they do look at the bins. If that bin is contaminated, they will place a sticker on that bin, and they will record the address. The trucks do have cameras as well, and they inspect the contents of the bin as it's tipped. However, once it's in that position, it's empty. So they will still sticker those bins once they've emptied them, and they will still record the address. It's worth noting that there is a flaw in that process, because it's not always possible to identify the address which a bin comes from. For example, at my house, I often have 5 or 6 bins outside because there's a cul-de-sac down the side. So in those cases, we'll still sticker the bin, and we record the area where the bin was picked up. The drivers have a record of previously stickered bins, which they have as they're driving around, so they keep an eye out for those individual bins. At the green waste site, we're doing occasional rubbish picks, putting people in there to actually go through the rows of green waste and pick rubbish out. We're also separating the resource recovery centre green waste from the curbside. So we're keeping those two waste streams separate. As I described earlier, we are doing audits at the MRF to see whether the situation improves. So sorry.
Nigel, well, you said the camera system at the moment's not ideal because it's already tipped in. Is there another way? Or that's not possible unless you had someone physically go along and look, and then sometimes people can hide the bad stuff and the normal stuff on top, eh?
So I'm going to go through some changes to the process we'll make in a moment, and we'll have a look at those. And see. Yep, that's cool. We are going to do some future campaigns. We will be doing a green waste campaign. It says July on that slide, sorry, but it's actually going to be August because we're going to run another campaign before that. And then we'll be doing a similar campaign in October on the recycling. And both of those campaigns will include radio, social media, print, brochures, etc. We mentioned the suspension of a service, and I'll come to that shortly, which will be included in the campaigns, and we'll talk about that as a separate campaign in June to July as well. So what is the big change that we're planning? We're going to use our bylaw, which states that customers will be notified about non-conforming material through Council's website and by direct communication using stickers and leaflets, which we already do. Repeated instances of non-conforming material placed in any collection corner may result in those containers being removed. So that is going to be the big change. So what we're looking at implementing is a 3 strikes and you're out process. So for repeat offenders, on their 3rd offence, we will remove that particular bin, whether it be green waste or recycling. And we'll talk a bit more about that, how that will actually work in a moment.
Nigel, can I just ask, you might get someone say, well, I didn't put that in my bin, someone else did. How do you manage that sort of situation?
They may do. I think what we have to bear in mind is before we actually remove a bin, we will have stickered it twice. So they will have had opportunities before then. I find will be whether someone is putting rubbish in their bin 3 times in a row could be a problem. I think we'd have to just deal with that on a case-by-case basis if it comes up. Yeah.
Nige, would it pay for everybody, say my number's 15 Waterterry Place, to have their numbers on those actual bins? The actual addresses, so when you've got a number of bins together, that bin, if it's consistently got stuff in it, you know that it belongs to 15 Waterterry Place. So having numbers on bins,
it would help. Yeah, it would be quite an exercise to do that, but it would. I agree, it would help, and it would certainly help the drivers identify them as well. The yellow lid bins were issued in 2016, and each one did have an address on it.
Exactly, a number.
Yeah, a number and an address. I'm not sure how many of those stickers are still on there, but yeah, it's something we could consider. Yeah. Yep.
So how much will that cost? Well, you know, like the cost of to go through the penalty kind of process, will that help prevent the costs that we're losing with the contamination? Because you said that we're, you know, I'm trying to see the balance in terms of the policing of it, and, you know, will we recover? Will that help mitigate loss for us? Or are we adding another cost? Not saying not to do it, but I'm just trying to find.
That's a good question. We haven't actually evaluated the cost of making this change. We haven't done that. I'll come to in a moment. I'll cover it, but basically, once we remove a bin, we will not give any rebate on the rates. So we will still be collecting the rates for that service, for the targeted rate for that service, and I'll come to that a bit more in a moment. But yeah, in answer to your questions, we haven't put a figure on that. Yeah. So what will the new process look like? Excuse me. On the left-hand side is a previous slide of the steps we have in place at the moment. And on the right-hand side are the new steps we're going to put in place. Where our contractor has resources available, they will do a drive prior to the trucks and inspect bins, especially where addresses have been identified previously. They're actually doing this at their cost because it's not in the contract. So we appreciate them doing that. On the first and second offence, as well as a sticker, we will also leave a letter and a flyer, whether it be in a recycle flyer or a green waste advising them what should and shouldn't go in the bin. Again, there's the problem, we may not always be able to identify the address, and in those cases, the flyer and the letter will be stuck to the bin with the sticker. On the third offence, we will remove that bin and leave another letter where possible, which basically will advise why the bin has been removed. And I'll cover that a bit more in a moment. All removed bins will be recorded, and that record sheet will be checked weekly, because when we remove a bin, we will remove it for 3 months. We've looked into what a lot of other councils are doing, and that time frame varies a lot. Some councils remove them for a year. Some councils remove them until the household signs a statement saying that they're going to behave themselves. But I'm not sure how effective that would be. So we've looked at what other councils are doing. We think that 3-month period is fair.
From the results from the other councils, does that increase fly tipping?
No. I haven't seen any reference to that.
So Nigel, when the bin gets taken away, what would stop a householder going and getting another bin and putting it there? Do you record the address and just not pick up at that address?
We issue all bins. All requests for bins go through our request for service procedure. So they have to actually call council and request another bin. When we remove a bin, Ozone, which is our request for service software, we will put a tag on that address. So as soon as that person calls up, customer services can see that they've had a bin removed, even before they start having a conversation. So that address will be specifically identified in the system.
And does that include if you go down to drop, when you go to purchase the bin down at the recycling centre?
They still have to go through our request for service. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So do we have information on particular areas where this is a problem, and whether those areas correlate with low socioeconomic issues?
The answer to that is yes, they do. There is that correlation, yes. But the campaign is going to be a district-wide campaign. We're not just targeting those areas. We will basically
Is there any possibilities of working alongside those social services that work in conjunction with those particular areas so that the ability, because not normal methods of communication are able to reach some of our whānau in those areas, whereas the constant contact that they have probably with social organisations is a way of them receiving the information a lot better. I'm just trying to.
No, yeah,
I'm just
no,
trying
that's
to
good. Yeah.
mitigate,
We're
the punishing the poor because the poor aren't able to access normal means, but also to education is difficult in those areas as well.
We're happy to work with any other organisations. Resources is an issue, but if other organisations approach us, and we're happy to do that, we can do that. Yep.
Nigel,
Yep.
if I've had 3 strikes and that, I obviously don't care about what I'm doing. You take my bin away and that, how are you going to stop me from maybe just putting my stuff in the neighbour's bin or causing the same problem?
We can't.
It just becomes a neighbours of war thing.
We need the community to play their part. We can't, you know, our education campaigns cannot change everyone's behaviour.
It's a behaviour thing.
We can't do that, but there's always that minority you cannot reach. But unfortunately, in this case, it's that minority that's causing the big problems. They can continue to use their rubbish bins. They can, if they've got extra rubbish, take it to the Resource Recovery Centre. But, yeah.
Who manufactures those bins? Is it a local, a national manufacturer, or we import them?
I think there's several manufacturers. I'm not sure whose ours is at the moment because our contractor supplies the bins. They purchase them and they supply them to council, and then we pay one by one as we take it from them. So we don't really have a stock as such. I'm not sure who the manufacturer is.
But we could find out, because normally they're high density polyethylene and it's usually transparent. It has to be made yellow, the bin. So if they were transparent, then you could see inside them.
Correct. And other councils have done that.
Oh, they have, okay.
As a trial period. It would be, we possibly could look at doing that for new bins. I don't know whether there'd be any cost difference to what we're paying for the current bins.
I wouldn't have thought so, because you just leave the pigment out. I mean, it's actually easier. So, even if, you had a camera on the end of the arm that picks it up, you'd actually have a good shot of seeing inside without the driver actually having to do anything. Because
I can look into that.
Worth investigating.
Yeah, I think we could phase them in slowly. I think it would be a very expensive exercise to replace the ones.
Oh, no,
but yeah.
To mitigate the risks of, the contamination and it contaminating tons and tons of other things, is there a process where if certain areas are identified as having high contamination, where their collection is kept separate from the other wider group that does good, that's not contaminated? If there's already identified areas, problem areas.
That is possible.
You've got to stop.
When I say,
I'm not saying don't do that side, but I'm just saying rather than, it keep on, the paru ones going back and contaminating the wider lot.
Yeah.
Mitigating.
You've got to stop the laziness, so that's what it is, really.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are, it's quite, the information's there, it's quite simple, you put this in that bin, that and that bin.
Yeah.
So why, I don't know why people can't come to grips with that.
I understand if there's a campaign that's going to go and it's not going to happen overnight. I'm just trying to look at measures that might mitigate during the period. you know, that changeover. So it's not damaging monetary wise to.
So question for you, Nigel, from you is just, I guess, can I grab some stats from you of certain areas that, you know, I might be able to influence the behaviours?
Yeah.
So are you okay with giving me those stats so I can go back and talk to
Yeah, basically, the information of areas is, we're not actually, in the case of green waste, we're not actually measuring the contamination per area. It's just information we're getting from the drivers.
Okay.
When they basically get to the composting facility and they empty their truckloads, it's information we're getting from them at that time. That's when they realise how contaminated a load is. The
Yellow bin.
the audits, yes, we have that information. They're not done every day. That's the thing. The material recovery facility just do them randomly.
Yeah.
I mean, we can identify from those audits which areas they are, but we don't have them for every area every day. I mean, it's important to know it's not just specific areas. It is a district-wide problem. Some areas have higher rates, but it is a whole district problem.
I'd make a suggestion where you're talking about leaving letters and all that you actually make them sticky so they stick on the bins so they don't fly away. So as people get their bins, they go, oh, there's something flapping there, I'll read it. Because I wouldn't like to think that someone has left a letter somehow and it disappears and they don't actually read it.
Yeah, the intention is the letter and the flyer will be placed in the letterbox where we can identify the property.
I don't have a letterbox at my place.
Okay.
I only built the place in '86 and I'm still getting around to it.
And in that case, then basically the letter and the flyer would be stuck with the sticker to the bin itself.
Sorry, I don't know about that. I'm just a question, because those magnets, they were really, really awesome. And I know there's lots of whānau who still got those magnets on their fridge, but they're probably outdated.
Yeah.
Because there were changes that were made. And so there's a lot of people, including us, because it's still on our fridge, that looks at that list when we're tidying up, or the kids will look at the list and stuff like that. And so people may inadvertently be still using that list because it's one that's easy to see, one that they see all the time. It's ingrained, and may not realise that they're breaching, they're contaminating their waste because things have changed.
Yep, so we can look at redoing those magnets.
Yeah, I mean, because the stickers are good, like we put the sticker on top of the bin too, you know, so the kids knew and everything else like that, but obviously with weather and it's peeled off, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just a couple of points for me. The first one, I thought the idea of numbering bins is a good one, and in terms, because it's only the ones where there's some ambiguity about what dress they belong to where it really matters. And so if we're doing a campaign, I mean, it seems to me we can encourage people to mark their own bins because they don't want them to be confused if they know there's going to be a consequence if they're misidentified. The other thing I was going to say was in terms of contamination, it seems to me there's two issues, right? There's people who want to recycle who just don't have the right information. And I'm looking at the ones you showed us, I've definitely contaminated bins because I thought you just put any kind of metal in there, and it turns out, oh no, I was quite wrong. So that, you know, having like really clear, easy information for people who want to do the right thing. And then the other thing is the people who just don't make an effort for whatever reason. And I'm wondering if there's any information or evidence around what are the motivators for people to recycle. You know, so, I mean, there'll be people who are concerned about environmental issues. There may be people who go, oh, well, it's costing the council, and therefore if we can recycle.
Yep.
Do you have information about what are the psychological drivers for recycling?
We can get that information. Not off the top of my head, but yeah, we can look at that as part of the campaign, yep. Yep. So basically, after the bin's been removed, we will hold it for 3 months and it will be returned after 3 months. And then obviously, if they reoffend, it will be removed again. We won't go through the 1, 2, 3 again. We'll just remove the bin again. So, looking at that information we have out there, so don't take these letters as what's going out there. They're just rough drafts to start with. So we will have a letter for a first and second offence, and one of the leaflets, which will be either the green waste or the recycling in the middle, and those will be left as well as the sticker. And then on the third offence, there will be a different letter that's left. That letter will say why the bin was removed. Basically that they've had 2 previous communications left. And importantly that they won't get any reduction in rates, because we expect that to be a question from people. I mean, the thoughts about not reducing the rates are basically because it's an abuse of the service. We have incurred extra costs and used extra resources to actually deal with the problem from their misuse of the service. So I'm happy to take any more questions.
Cardboard boxes, you know how they've often got the packing tape on them? Does it matter if, I mean, I try and take it all off, but it's a bit of a pain.
So do I, but it will go through the process if you leave it on there.
It does go through the
Yeah.
process. But we should try and take it off.
But you should try and take it off,
And
yeah.
where it says soft prunings, what does soft, I mean, if it's a branch like that, is that soft?
Any prunings,
Any
basically.
prunings, okay,
proper.
because they go through a mulcher, I suppose, which
Yeah.
deals to it, okay,
Yep.
thank you. No further questions, thank you, Nigel.
Right, thank you.
Cheers, kia ora.
I'll take all those comments back. Thank you.
I'll make one other. I really think the letter should emphasise costs,
Okay. Yep.
because it talks about not being fair to people, which is important, but also, yeah, costs as well. Because people won't have any idea of what it does cost us and therefore them.
I was just also going to say, Mr Chair, that while we're sitting here, I just did the waste survey. I actually went to the council website and it came up in the first banner as a waste survey. I didn't know there was a waste survey for people to fill out. So you might think we know, but it's really hard to get people to engage and stuff. Yeah, anyway, I did it in a couple of minutes. I don't know if I passed it.
While you were just sitting here,
Yes. Yeah,
well, that's,
listening with absolute. We can look multitask.
yeah. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.
It's Alex, Ian and Gareth next to talk about open spaces strategy. Yeah, muck around. There's only a certain amount of time you can spend talking about rubbish. Important subject though. Yeah. And I think that there needs to be some penalties, encourage people, but I'll stick with this transparent lid. Thank you, folks.
Kia ora, good morning. Atamaria, Mr Mayor, councillors. My name is Gareth Moore-Jones. I'm Reserves Advisor with the Parks Operations team. I'm on a fixed-term role to get a current project up over the line and hopefully adopted by you good people on the 2nd of October. The draft open space strategy has been a long time coming for a number of reasons. And what we'd like to cover today would be why the strategy, where we're at, our processes to date, some key points, principles, and the journey from the current state to the future view. I really would like to emphasise that having a open spaces strategy is not an indication of not already having a wonderful and diverse and well-maintained open space suite right across the district. But it is a focus on where we have been, what we currently do, but what the future might bring, and how we use open spaces to meet that future, and how open spaces need to meet the future that's coming. Some really big, gnarly issues are coming our way. Open spaces are a core part of our community and are well loved. So it is a question not of introducing new concepts, it is a case of how do we enhance what is currently being done by council for a long time to meet the future. So that is really what I'd like to emphasise today.
Thank you for putting your name and your date on your front page of your report. It's really good to see who's put it together. Thanks.
Button on the right. Sorry, I'm just getting advice as I go along there. So the why, the strategy, the journey to date, the demands on an open space do continue to evolve. Historically, it's been used for land for sporting, community, cultural events, as well as requests from the private and public sector to meet other needs, including housing supply. Those issues are not addressed in the strategy at this stage. A future coming together of a number of council strategies and policies. What it's also looking at is what are the changing demographics, what are the changing uses of open spaces that we need to address, because things are changing the way people use open space and why it's there. Historically, the planning for open spaces has occurred on an ad hoc basis. There are a number of reserve management plans. There's the district reserve management plan, and there are a number of other plans and strategies based around specific areas or specific needs identified over time. So in 2021, Whakatane District Open Spaces Strategy, which was previously called the Open Spaces Strategy, was started, and however, due to various circumstances, that was not finalised. The project recommenced in March 2025 and included a review of all of the previous work and further development to update the scope and finalise the document. In looking at all of the previous work that was done, it was all high quality, excellent work, and there is no suggestion that that previous work was not of a high standard or meeting needs, but a variety of circumstances got in the way to mean that it didn't progress from June 2021, but it is now progressing to a stage where we hope we provide you with something that is suitable and meets your needs. We reduced the scope from the original 2021 start, so it's now very focused, and we've reduced the scope, so it's no longer including the uses of play, active recreation and sport. That is something that Sport Bay of Plenty, one of Council's strategic partners, is looking at doing, and I do believe something's out for tender at the moment for that piece of work. It's providing clarity on those principles. What are the underlying principles that the district believe?
Your last sentence about Sports Bay of Plenty, it's gone out to tender. Are we?
I understand that they are doing something along those lines at the moment.
So they are tendering for, so are they the ones that have put the tender out, or we put the tender out?
I do believe it's a Bay of Plenty wide approach. It's not specifically.
Thank you.
But I might have misspoken, but it is something I understood. I will learn the protocol very quickly. Yes. What we focused on in this update to the strategy, or getting the strategy to the table, are the principles, our key focus areas that are meeting our most immediate concerns, our provision, and responding to feedback from the community in previous consultations that suggested whilst there's a great amount of open space available, there's a requirement to exercise more care in equity of access, so can everybody access those spaces, and equity of the quality of provision when they have accessed those spaces, regardless of where in the district people might live. Our purpose and objectives: to put and to reduce the scope. We looked at what are the main areas, what are the main headings of our purpose and our objectives. So partnership and kaitiakitanga, community wellbeing and strategic management. And those bullet points underneath are what we've looked at to come up with the principles and our key focus areas. Input and sources to date. So the draft strategy was currently with iwi for pre-engagement through Toi Kotiua, but that has now, we've changed the process slightly. They will receive the updated draft this afternoon, and they will have an extended engagement period. So that goes to the 4th of August, and the public consultation will start in July. So we're working through our internal team to make sure that iwi representatives have an advance copy of this strategy for feedback, that we can then start including feedback along the way. As you'll notice, it's gone back to 2021, so analysis of current open space, how they're used, insights gathered through the long-term plan, the 2024-2034 LTP community engagement, the iwi submissions to the LTP consultation, the Rex Morpeth Recreation Hub Mā Koutou consultation. I need to emphasise that we did not look at the actual development or what is going to happen in those master plans. It is just that master plan and the facilities sit within and on an important part of open space infrastructure. It's a district-wide, it's one of our premier. It's the arts, culture and creativity strategy, because we wanted to ensure that we get out of that notion that only physically active people use our open spaces. Our open spaces are used for arts, cultures, events, kapahaka, all sorts of things that fall under a wider range than just sporting pursuits. And it's important as we go forward with one of those future issues that we need to look at, is that how people and why people are using our open spaces is changing. The reduction and the decrease in the amount of structured sport, what else is happening in its place, and how might our open spaces be redesigned or repurposed to meet future needs, not just existing and long-standing traditional needs. Annual resident satisfaction surveys, they continue to be high achievers in that area, open space and parks operations. And ongoing kōrero with strategic Māori partnerships, Toi Kotiua and our communications team, who I would personally like to thank for their wonderful input into somebody that doesn't know the processes. They've been great. Description, open spaces, we had to define. There's a number of descriptors around about what an open space is. Personally, I'm a firm believer that open spaces exist as and unto themselves. They are te taio, they are environment, they are nature. And we as residents use them as assets for various purposes, but they exist in and of themselves. So how do we provide open spaces that allow them to exist and flourish, at the same time as enabling our residents to play sport, co-mingle, fly a kite, play on a playground intergenerationally, all of those things at the same time. The draft strategy is important to note also that it's council-managed open space. Council-managed open space is something that we can look at and set principles for and guiding principles for and targets for. We can't, for areas of open space that aren't managed or facilitated by council. One of the proposed draft questions or actions out of this is that we look to see where else open space are provided, schools, marae, a whole range of areas, and we work to engage in greater access to open space, so we increase the network of open spaces throughout the district. Sports-built facilities, aquatic centres and holiday parks are not in scope of this particular strategy. Through Councillor, through you, Chair.
I'm just having a struggle trying to think what's a flood alleviation infrastructure that's in scope in regards to open spaces where people are engaging in a variety of activities. I can't think of one, so I'm sure there's plenty, I just can't think of one.
Mr. Chair, through you, in some of the new subdivisions, Shore Road, for example, we have rain gardens, and they have, so you actually use your gardens to regulate stormwater flow and that sort of thing as well. So that's what that refers to. Yep.
Thank you. It's a good point. If we're thinking of future development and future urban development and future residential development, when you're looking at the provision of open space and however that is provided or managed, whatever mechanism, it is important what we know about climate impact is that we address those open spaces as possible stormwater or flood alleviation or retention ponds. So we start looking at open spaces alongside our infrastructure in that type of area. At the same time, in the meantime, between floods, they provide wonderful parks, open spaces, and for me personally, great spots to practice my very wobbly e-bike riding. Our draft vision, as our taio flourishes, our people thrive, and people feel connected to Whakatane District's reserve and open space network. This quote is taken from the existing District Reserve Management Plan, and it encapsulates exactly the intention. The draft vision, and I freely and unashamedly quote Simon Upton, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, who states that society and the economy, put starkly, are simply a subset of the environment, and the environment comes first. So that's the approach we've taken. And we've landed on some principles. There are 7 principles there. After excellent advice from the executive leadership team, we are reducing and trying to merge and streamline those. But we care for the environment, we look at community well-being, we work together. We look at mana whenua prominence, so we aspire to work with and use and understand sustainability. Everything we do is sustainable and efficient in resource use, an acknowledgement that the costs of maintaining, let alone developing new open spaces, is high. How do we do what we want to do in the future in a sustainable, fiscally responsible manner? Equity of access and quality, and this builds on the back of the excellent equity, diversity and accessibility strategy that Council recently adopted. And it was also one of the core things that when my reading back through all the documents over the last 5 years has been lots of spaces. Can we improve how they are accessed? Can we improve their quality, but in an equitable manner across the district? And then economic development. How do you balance te taio with economic development? So using those open spaces for returns that may well be used for the very maintenance of those open spaces. This is our current status. approximately 1,440 hectares, 330 public open spaces. In this graphic, we've mentioned playgrounds, cemeteries, sports reserves, and we have mentioned campgrounds and aquatic centres. Whilst it's not in the scope of the strategy, it's really important to recognise that they exist as a use of open space. Before the pool, there was open space. The pool provides open space. Playgrounds, it becomes a hub. So we've mentioned that in our current view. And then we looked at what the community has told us to date from all of those areas I referenced before. The last paragraph there is, whilst there is general agreement that there are plenty of open spaces in the district, feedback also points towards ensuring equity of access, ensuring similar quality across townships in the district, and a desire for more quality and accessible playgrounds. And that last statement fits in also nicely because that's a core plank of Sport Bay and Plenty's regional spaces and places strategy, the current one. By accessible playgrounds, it's not just accessibility for disability, it's accessibility also for intergenerational play. The kids that are asked to go and look after little Johnny after school, they want a playground to play on as well. Ideally, you've also got a playground that koro, such as myself, can go and play with the grandkids on equipment that is also suitable for myself. That's what the future is asking us to engage in, intergenerational. So then we come to Council's future view. What Council has provided for many years is highly regarded, and the view is, for the strategy, is that Council thinks that it should continue to foster opportunities where communities meet for their well-being whilst working with our partners to ensure and enhance the health of Te Taio. But the strategy must be flexible in response to needs such as climate impacts, the local growth strategy, and trends. So, as an example, new trends that are enabling recreation, such as e-bikes, allow more people to stay active for longer in their lives, meaning the need for more active transport, green corridors. So how can I go to the library, to the doctors, to home, to school, to the supermarket, on my e-bike, using 3 corridors that also may well double as water overflow infrastructure in the distant future. So that's linkage reserves, new ways of enabling technology. There is a new technology being used that we're all knowing about, drones. Now they're starting to incorporate it into drone frisbee golf, which will be coming to a town like Whakatane shortly. How do we use our open spaces to enable the way people want to use technology for their leisure time? Very briefly, in the not too distant future, there will be a greater focus on recreational wellbeing activities in our open spaces. Urban farming and community gardens will become a focal point. Food sovereignty is a big issue and will become a big issue. How are our open spaces currently or in the future used for urban farming, community gardens, biodiversity education, bee pollinator pathways, social and cultural gatherings, sustainable infrastructure and energy. So can you look at using existing open space or retrofitted open space for solar panels? Is there a way of enhancing the energy produced by what people do on playgrounds to run the lights that run the playgrounds? Work and study environments, as more and more people are working from home, they would then have the ability to use the local park or open space as a work or a study environment because it's lit by technology. There's wireless everywhere. There are charging stations in ground. Climate resilience and adaptation, it's a biggie. It's one of our 2 key focuses through to 2028. And then the changing nature of structured sports. You might not need all the open space that's currently provided for Saturday sport more spontaneous activity. There's a space fit for purpose, so instead of always being lined or marked for a particular sporting activity, in the future it may well be that it is using technology to enable multiple markings for open space so that it's used and it's fit for purpose for whoever's using it at that particular time. And that technology is already starting to be looked at. So all of these and other changes require council to be flexible and to manage and create spaces that are multi-use or are repurposed in the intervening years until they are needed. Achieving council's future view, council's role, provider, funder, not direct dollars, but funder through our long-term plan, annual plan and resource allocations, partnering, facilitating, connecting groups and organisations, advocating to funding bodies, advocating to environmental groups and central and local government, and regulatory, which is one of the key functions of council, is how do we use our regulatory abilities to control and manage activities. The types of open space that is currently looked at, and one that is perfectly suitable for the immediate future across our district, and in the supporting documents for the draft strategy, these are listed in full along with their standards of provision. Premier district reserves are neighbourhoods, so those our local sports and recreation reserves, our district sports and recreation reserves like Rex Morpeth, cultural and heritage reserves like Puketapu Pa and Taniatua Cemetery, our natural reserves, Kobe Point Scenic Reserve and Portahope Recreation Reserve, utility and linkage reserves. So those are our reserves that we are using, but they're not their primary focus of the reserves. So they're linkage. And then civic amenity and open space, like the Great Out area out the front here. These are also open spaces that we are looking at how they're provided into the future. As I say, in the draft supporting documents, there's a list of how each of those is defined, and it's using the current national standard, which is Recreation Aotearoa codes of standards for each of those. And each of those, Whakatane District Council rates very highly. We're also including access maps. So where are the open spaces? And there's a 5 to 10 minute walk access, which is a holding access that is used nationally. When people say, how close should I be to a open space? Some people use 500 metres, some people use 5 or 10 minute walks. Other councils use certain number of hectares per 1,000 people, which can become a blunt instrument because you could have all of your hectares in one area of town and have met the metric but not the others. And the points to note through our wonderful geospatial team is that the maps are based on residential zones, and those are, let me get them here. The residential planning zones, specifically the general residential zone, medium density residential zone, and the future urban zone, specifically 12 Huna Road. So these are all being worked on at the moment. They're nearly finished and they should be finalised in the next week. So, for instance, reserves and open spaces and coastlands, where are they? And then you go from the reserves themselves, spreading outwards, you've got where can you get to and what residential areas are covered in a 5 minute walk and what residential areas in purple are covered in a 10 minute walk. So in Edgecombe, pretty well covered, but it doesn't mean to say that if there's not future development there and it goes to the west or the east or the north or the south, that you won't need to start then considering how do people access And what is the best Whakatane district? And here's the buffer zone. So we put yellow. So there's 500 metres around reserves. And Taniatua is well met. But there's also the fawny coloured, the buffer. The fawn is where those overlap. So you can see from an optical view that Taniatua is well covered in terms of provision. It doesn't talk about the equity and the quality of provision that people get to when they get to those areas, which is an important part of the future of the strategy. And the future provision metrics, which we hope to be able to come back to Council at some stage in the future, when we've had time to look at this, is what is the best for Whakatane district? A national standard is a national standard, but it also incorporates metropolitans, it incorporates provincial cities, it incorporates smaller towns. So consideration of what is the best provision metric ensuring equity for district for Whakatane. Is it walk time? Is it distance? Is it others such as 300, which is the new one that's being put up? Every time you open your door, every household and every workplace should be able to see 3 trees. There should be 30% canopy cover within 300 metres, so they can measure that as a climate mitigation, and they should be able to access an open space within 300 metres. Easier done in a city, believe it or not, than it is in an area like this, but there are a number of different provision metrics that I think it's good for council to go. For instance, should we have a district metric, or should we have a town provision metric based on which areas need more and which areas have less access to public transport to go to, or have a highway in between? I'm just checking the time. 24, thank you.
Just looking at the 330, I'm just wondering for some of our whānau, they'll be seeing that as wondering if I've got $3, is it going to cost me $30 or is it going to cost me $300 in terms of cost, but also just reflecting back to council itself as well. And, is there any measurements from this strategy in terms of firstly, you talked about the value of each of those different areas. Are there any sort of infometrics that quantifies that in terms of dollar terms? Because we do have those whānau who will see some of this mahi as nice to haves. And so being able to understand, we know that the other aspects of the value, but the value itself on what those, particularly, when you look at the funeral businesses and their use of the cemeteries and the revenue, I don't want to be harsh, but that is thinking from that, and the use of those spaces, the hireage of those spaces for our, or the return that we do get from those who utilise those open spaces. I'm just trying to find, the monetary value so that we have that information when we stack up, when we talk about sports or when we talk about community using that. Some people invisibilise totally the revenue that comes out of all of that. And we do need to have some way of getting those figures. Thanks, sorry.
No, it's a really excellent comment, if I may say. Thank you.
Aren't they in the fees and charges?
Yeah, they should be. I mean, that'd be
They-
great
they
to
are,
have.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
If we could get that quantified.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Marie.
Right. Yes, thank you, Alex. The Parks Leaders Forum of Aotearoa, New Zealand, they're an agency set up specifically for parks people outside of Recreation Aotearoa, and they've currently worked with Lincoln University to quantify the value of open space provision, or quantify not just the cost of provision, but as an example, for every hectare that might save X number of dollars in healthcare costs if people access it. I think their overall figure was open spaces are worth, in a non-financial measure, something like $12 billion a year across the country. So there is that data available, and we can certainly access it. In fact, we already have, so we took it out of the strategy because we had to reduce the pages. But that's okay. So I'd like to state again, from the beginning and now, is this is the journey from our current state, which is perfectly acceptable, to our future view of what we should be providing and how we measure that future view, taking into account climate impacts, taking into account local growth strategy. For instance, they are now doing some maps, which I believe councillors have seen, down to a granular level, so you can identify where there might be a cohort that are under 16, that don't have access to local employment, but they don't also have access to public transport. So if you're looking at those types of things, you're looking at equity of access and provision, do you then start saying, do we have a district view of provision, or do we have a township view of what might be provided into the future? Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. I'm just thinking about your previous statement about there is measurement on community benefit and well-being. But of course, we're getting directives from central government to strip out well-being. Yeah. And, we do have an infrastructure water crisis, looming. So it's kind of like there's going to be this tension of how much we invest in this, noting that there are health benefits and personal well-being, but, how do we balance that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's an age-old discussion, and it's often shown that the benefits of what council provides actually show up as a positive in somebody else's budget. So people don't know that because council provided open spaces, there might be a front-end reduction in future health costs, but those future health costs show up in a budget, but you can never prove it because you don't know what the health costs would have been had somebody not accessed a park. It's a dilemma and a debate, but there is work being done on that.
I'm just thinking when we go back out to the community, having some of that narrative might actually assist and educate.
Yep. Thank you.
Just Mr. Chair, just to follow on. Just to follow on from Leslie, that's sort of the angle where I was going to too, was to be able to have that quantified monetary value of what is outputted, but also too, we hear it face to face from our community groups who have consistently said, we want to have this event here, but we can't. And the scale of those events and the scale of events that we do have that end up having to, have it outdoors where they could really need a facility to have it here, up to thousands of people being able to come to something. So I'm not trying to pull out figures, pie in the sky things, but the value of that in terms of being able to see what the investment would be to support improvements, and then having that information that says this is the value of that. These are the values of the events that we've held where we've had so many thousands of people. This was the figure that came into our economy. I've probably gone off the track on here, but that's the kind of info to measure up.
Thank you. No, it's great, and it's an extension of the multiplier effect. When you have an event, you could then actually start looking at some of those metrics about how much perceived public health or public good or social capital has been built by an event that was held in a council open space. And the economic benefits.
And actually, following on from that, the tourism and events team will have that economic benefit
Yeah.
of large events. So like whether it's Rex Morpeth Park or whether it's the Edgerton Rugby Field.
Or whether it was the 90 festival.
Yeah.
The festivals that we've held, they
Mm.
should have been of how much it would be. And sometimes, a lot of the times, that's the thing that's missing when we're talking back to our communities about how important it is to have these spaces.
Thank you. Press the right one. The key project, so the 10-year plan, and it's so important to note the alignment between this strategy and the long-term plan, all the mahi that went into that and the outcomes of the 10-year plan. So the current projects that are slated in the 10-year plan in this area, the Awatapu Lagoon, wetland constructions, the new cemetery, accessible play spaces across the district, the Rec Morpeth Park Recreation Hub, that is in there. I've put that and retained it in the slide because it's important to realise that that's a large area of open space of which the actual infrastructure is sitting on a corner. Whatever the outcome of that, it will look at the provision of open space and how that open space is used. Evrima car park, why would a car park be an open space? Because it's important to remember that we have to enable access to some, and quality access and quality facilities at open spaces. So I've retained that in here. Murupara Park improvements, Marae Totara improvements, the southern regeneration in Murupara, the Wairaka Park upgrade, the southern regeneration in Minganui, and Taniatua Cemetery expansion. With Minganui, currently you'll note that there are no access maps that include Minganui because council don't manage any open space in Minganui, but heavily involved in the southern regeneration. That's, yep.
Gareth, if I may,
Yes.
Just before you go off the Taniatua Cemetery expansion, where are we at in getting a report back on how far we're off from possibly getting resource consent? Because we're down to about 5 actual plots in that cemetery, so it is a high priority.
So I'll pass over.
Chairman, through you. We're getting really close to submitting the resource consent for that work. We've just had part of the work. What's held us up is there's been a wetland identified in that cemetery down at the bottom, so that's changed our plans. So what we're going to be doing is developing or adding space on the western side, or northwestern side, and that is going to require resource consent. So that's we're really close to actually getting that underway at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll be kept up to speed with where or how that process is progressing, right?
Yes, we will let you know how we go.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ian or Alex. Just wanting to know 2 things. What else is there to do with the Wairaka Park upgrade? And when you explain that, could that not come out of the Harbour Fund rather than out of our LTB budget?
Just, Mr. Chairman, with regard to the upgrade, it's obviously a really busy, a high-use area. And the facilities, the playground facilities are really old as well. So that's what that funding is about, is to actually look at improving those facilities. And actually part of the accessible, there's some funding for accessibility in there as well. And what we're looking as part of that is to provide some, an accessible play space as well, along with the upgrades there. But in terms of the budget,
I'm unsure about
the
the
LTP,
Harbour Fund question. I would need to find out on that one. I don't know that it would.
Discussion for another day.
All right.
I suspect.
Sure. And I had one other question. Sutherland's Lake's not included in here? And
Sullivan
why not?
Lake Yeah, Sullivan Lake is not included here, and that's an operational project. So it is included in the long-term plan going forward, so it'll be part of operation.
Super, thanks.
Just a question for you. Marae Tōtara improvements is a priority. I mean, it appears like we're spending a lot of time and effort in Marae Tōtara, especially around flying fox and stuff. And yet, are there not other places and spaces that we can have a look at besides Marae Tōtara that caters for just us? A smaller community area?
Marae Tōtara, as with Wairaka, and it's, the equipment there is really old and it needs upgrading as well. So that's the reason for that. And the same thing there is we're looking at including accessibility, making accessible, more accessible as well. Murupara has been included as well. We have recognised that Murupara is, there's a need for improvements out there, and we will slowly, we will start moving through other rural areas as well.
Thank you.
They certainly will be looked at.
Just one more, if I may, Ian. I don't see anything in the report here about, with regards to the playgrounds. I know it's been brought up, I think, in the LTP as well. The working together with, say, Disabilities Resource Centre to make sure that those playgrounds are compatible for people with disabilities as well.
Yes, Councillor. That is part of it. The accessible includes looking at disabilities as well. So we've just recently, we're going through the process of finalising an accessibility assessment for all the playgrounds, which identifies those types of things. So it's, and we will be working with, places like Disabilities Resource.
Thanks,
and
Ian.
they'll probably help us fund as well.
Yes. Thank you.
One more. Just looking at the values that it comes across, I suppose, for the next 10 years of those projects, was looking for the value of whakawhanake, which was the economic benefits, because just noticing that there weren't any of the projects that reflected that value. And just wondering whether our suggestions around looking for those info metrics might assist in that. Am I making sense, or are you guys just nodding to be nice?
We can certainly take that into account, thank you. And I guess that segues perfectly into the next slide. Thank you, Councillor. Because on adoption of the strategy, I'll cross my fingers on a hope for adoption of the strategy, other actions will be developed. Reiterating a previous comment, it is not a new thing that Council is doing, so it doesn't need a whole swathe of actions to go with it. What it does do is to suggest some actions that if we're talking about our journey from our current state to our future view, we're taking new technologies, new demographics, climate change, a whole range of things into account. What are the tools that Council need to achieve those? But then what is the extra information we need? And I might retrofit this slide and put right at the top, research the economic value of the provision of Whakatane's open spaces parks. So that would certainly go as an example of an action. And so some of these might include, these are not in concrete, but just to give you a flavour of what would come next, is that we would research, identify and embed the district open space provision metrics. So councillors would have an opportunity to fully debate what is it? Is it targeted? Is it universal? Is it district? Is it township? What is the look, flavour and taste of Whakatane district when we're talking about our provision of open spaces? It then might look at town-based implementation business plans. So if we agree that you come up with a metric and some places don't have it or they won't have it when you have future development there as a result of the local growth strategy or any other district change, what would those business plans look like? What would it cost to put in those open spaces? What would the return on that investment be and what would the social outcomes be? Council and Ian's team just undertook a district playground audit. I think that's what you're calling it. But in line with the local growth strategy and perhaps the first tranche of the climate change impact assessments, where would they be and what type of playground should they be and how would people access them? So it's taking what we know about playgrounds, what we'd like to provide in the future, in line with those major things coming. Councillor.
So if you do that in relation back to where you're talking about the 10-year list back on 55, really on the 10-year list, you're just talking about Murupara, Minganui and a Taniatua cemetery, which I think is more infrastructure rather than reserve. But the rest of it's in Whakatane, so, and link that with the playgrounds. What about the Titeko playground? What about Taniatua playground? What about Marata playground? If you talk about, I've been to Marae Tautra, because we have to take our grandkids there during the school holidays, because the one at Marata is just old, out of date, and we go to Marae Tautra and some of the others in Whakatane for them to have a decent play. And so the playground's really good, Flying Flocks is really good, but you come back to the Titeko, the Marata, the other ones, so why isn't it on the 10-year list? And I know for the one in Marata especially, like that's the most used public toilets in our district, and people stop there, use the coffee. The amount of kids that play on that playground, because I go down with my grandkids, and a lot of parents do changeover, child custody things on that. Kids are there all the time, and yet it's all about Whakatane.
Through you, Mr Chair, and Ian or Alex might want to follow up. I've gone back a couple of slides and I should have made sure that this was what was already agreed and adopted in the long-term plan and how that fits into the principles that are coming up in the strategy. But it also does state that there are a lot of operational things going on, and there's annual and seasonal and business as usual work that Parks Operations undertakes. One of those was doing a playground audit for the district, and from that playground audit it'll become clearer of what is the access, but what is the quality of those playgrounds, and are they fit for purpose? And as I understand it, any remediation of those wouldn't have to wait until another long-term plan. So these are the big ticket items that you as councillors adopted in the long-term plan, but it doesn't preclude and doesn't stop other operational work that goes on. Was that Ian?
Yeah, if I may just add that we do have renewals funding as well, annually for playgrounds as well. So we will be, looking at playgrounds systematically as well, and within the rural areas, and upgrading those as well. These ones were highlighted because of the, that they're extremely high use areas, and that's why they were included for upgrades, specific upgrades rather than just through the renewals program.
And I accept that, but I'll also challenge you on the high usage of some of the ones coming into Titeko where there's the public toilets, coming into Marata where the most used public toilets, etc., etc. And the toilets and the playgrounds are rubbish. I was going to say crap, but that would be too far.
Yep, understand. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have a few others. We would look at the water infrastructure, the excellent work that Michael van Tilburg and others do in that area. They're already starting to think about, if you have water infrastructure, how is that utilised as also open space for a variety of community purposes? What would it actually look like? What would those provision principles include in new subdivisions? We'd research the relationships between new technologies and open space provision. So new technologies like outdoor lighting for parks or movable markings, so you don't just have something that looks like it's space captured by a particular sport. Because it's important that any space that council provides to be entirely equitable is assumed by anybody that they could use it at any particular time, with constraints. You don't walk on the top of the Premier cricket block. But how do you enable those spaces to be fit for purpose for whoever is using them at that time? And then also to investigate the partnership with schools, marae, land trusts and other open space providers to maximise community access. Council provides 1,440 hectares. I should imagine that that is similar provided by other agencies that could be accessed. What we need to know is what needs to be put in place to allow public access to spaces in a safe manner to increase that open space network. But those are the types of actions that will come out of it. Our proposed timeline, so the council briefing today, we're presenting to the Living Together Committee to seek approval for public engagement. The Living Together Committee will, I believe, next week have the agenda, which will have the latest version of the draft strategy and the supporting documents in that. Our formal consultation starts, we have consultation going out today through our e-liaison team, and then the formal wider public consultation, July, August. Then update the strategy with feedback, final comms and design prepared, executive leadership team in September, and then final for hopeful adoption on the 2nd of October. That's our time frame. And I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge lots of people that have worked on this, lots of staff and lots of other people since 2021, and I know Ian found a document that suggested maybe even 2019. There are people like Kayla Warren, Sarah Evans, the comms team in Council are magnificent, the design team, geospatial planners that have come and picked up and enabled us to produce a pretty good draft open space strategy when we started it basically in March. So I'd like to acknowledge those people and those teams because they're outstanding. Thank you.
Do we have to go out to consultation? Like we've got waste going down, we've got lots of consultation with the spatial plan, and the economic development strategy. Like, what would we expect to hear back from the community that would make us change anything?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good question, and I think it's a decision for elected members in terms of...
We don't have to then?
Well, I don't believe there's a requirement to. We have, like you say, done comprehensive engagement on this process early on. So that's, a decision that you can make.
Just to follow on too, I mean, the public would also still have the public forum of our meetings to be able to provide feedback if there was a report coming through. I'm just saying, the public are going to be hit with a lot of stuff with it being an election year already coming through. And then this would be going all the way through to October. It's like, what would the quality of the engagement be anyway, as well, to create any substantial change? Yeah.
Through you.
Water engagement.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is it fizzer? Through you, Mr. Chair, the engagement over a period of time has been significant. The counter-argument to that is that it has been over a period of time. But I don't think, when you're talking about open spaces, that people's views or values or perceptions change dramatically. They love their open spaces, they want it more accessible and a higher quality. And I did research, because I hadn't come across it before, Council's significance and engagement policy, section 5(1)(b) suggests that we would be required if there are matters of significance, and section 6 says that if no new light is expected to come to hand, then there'd be no requirement to. That was my understanding of it last night.
I think, it would be good to get a steer here if, if there is an appetite to consult or not.
Councillor Jukes will go around.
Oh, right, okay, I'll start this.
think if we've already done significant consultation, I really don't personally see the need to consult. I don't think there's anything controversial in there. We've already consulted and, you know, times are tough out there, so let's save some budget while we can.
Councillor O'Brien. Oh, sorry, Councillor O'Brien.
Just thinking about stuff inside here right now, but no, I don't think we need to go to.
Councillor Pullo.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd just like you to take away today, it's not really strategic plan thing, but our thanks to your gardening team that do such a great job and make a huge difference to our town and the district really. So please pass that on.
So that's no to engagement?
No to engagement.
Is that a no to engagement or a yes? Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, but
If it's not necessary,
yeah, okay. Kevin? No. Nandor? Oh, Tony?
Yeah, if it's not necessary, I mean, the projects that are there from the long-term plan, which had its consultation process already, and we already know for some of the other projects that they had extensive consultation already. I mean, as a backup, we could just list all the reports that we had regarding each of those areas as the consultation that's already taken place. So, no.
Just thanks to the Deputy Mayor for raising it. I think it's a really good question. Although we've had a lot of consultation, I do wonder if that's been particularly targeted, and so whether the kind of general community has had a chance to really have a say. But having said that, I don't think this isn't really changing anything drastically. It's simply maybe thinking things about things a little bit differently and expanding our thinking. So I don't think it's necessary.
Can I forgot to add to that, of course, we it's already with iwi at the moment anyway. So
Due to go out today.
yeah, I'm not meaning that they not be consulted. Would that make a difference?
That would happen regardless.
Yeah, no, I think the way that you actually structured it right at the beginning, listing all the different engagements that we've had, I think there's more than enough evidence from the community, and there wouldn't, I could imagine, be substantial change except relief that they don't have to consult, and if we can save a few dollars as well, like Joy said.
No need.
No need. But thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go back public consultant, but I think this topic is pretty relevant to our district-wide. It's a long-term plan. It's not a short-term, and funds are tight at the moment. But I think we do need to be looking in the 10 to 15-year bracket, and there's a lot of this is coming about. The consultation we had for the Rex Morpeth hub was well supported. So, but I think generally everyone is pretty keen to see a good open spaces in all our districts, not just Whakatane.
So it's a no.
You've got your answer. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Can I just make a couple of comments as well before we finish? I know we're winding up. First of all, I think it's a really great document, actually. So thank you for the work that's been done from bringing it forward. I liked the metric around kind of walkability. I thought that was really great because it's about kind of generational equity. You don't need a car to access it in terms of a carbon-constrained future. I think that's a really great way to approach it. I really like some of the stuff in there about biodiversity and kind of rewilding potential. I saw some stuff about bee pollination and things, some really nice ideas in there. And the whole thing around the using connections so people get from place to place
and using the water infrastructure. I thought that was some really good thinking in there about that stuff. Partnerships with other organisations, I thought that was really cool in there as well. I had one question which is around, and I know it's just potential technology, but movable marking, which sounds really cool. Does it have a potential to create a kind of an excessive bureaucracy where, because at the moment if you've got like soccer fields marked out, anyone can rock up and have a soccer game. You don't need to have anything in place, whereas if they're kind of movable markings, I don't know how they do them, but does that mean that you're then going to have to apply to get some markings, or like, I don't know, is it going to create problems as well as solve problems?
If I could answer that through you, Mr. Chair. The problems with any new technology is when you engage them early, they cost an arm and a leg. I was saying, when it comes to new technology, the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. And we would need to look at all of this research and what are the trends, because 2 years ago, who would have guessed, as a professional futurist, I looked at it and even I didn't understand what AI was going to make us difference to our everyday lives. So we don't know what is going to be a difference in 10 years. We can come up with a lot of options and a lot of things what are happening out there, and then what is the value to our district for them. But researching and trying to stay ahead of the game is the best way of doing it, so I appreciate your comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. That brings us to the end of the briefing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you so much.
Push that up.
I'm just going to come to the retiring room for sort of 10 minutes, update you on a couple of things.
Yeah.
And we've just got a couple of staff coming in as well.
Councillor Rangiaho.
Okay. Kia ora tātou, me whakakapi wā tātou hui. Kia whakairia te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia turiki whakataha ai, kia turiki whakataha ai. Haumi e hui e tāki e. Kia ora tātou.